The NBA playoffs are here, and you'll be in hoops heaven betting all the action on FanDuel Sportsbook because new and existing users can bet risk-free throughout the playoffs. New users can get up to $1,000 back if your first bet doesn't win. Plus, once you have an account, you can bet one same-game parlay risk-free every week. That means you can combine multiple bets for an even bigger win. And if you don't win, you'll get up to $10 back. Just sign up with my promo code Hennig to bet the NBA playoffs risk-free. That's promo code Hennig exclusively on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Must be 21 or older to play and present in New Jersey. Risk-free bet for first online real money wager only, and refund issued as non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 14 days. Same game parlay refund issued as non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 7 days. Max refund $10. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Same game parlay available for multiple sports in all states on mobile and web. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
South Jersey's play-by-play home for the Eagles,
touchdown,
Sixers,
it's good,
and Flyers.
Oh, big save by Carter Hart.
97.3 ESPN, WENJ, WENJ HD, Millville, Atlantic City, a Town Square media station. This is Sports Bash Saturday with Josh Hennig, live from the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. Now, Sports Bash Saturday. Here's Josh Hennig.
Power Hour Sports Bash Saturday right here on 97.3 ESPN FM, the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. It's free thanks to First Bank of Seattle City, and we are live in the Matt Blatt Kia Studios here on 97.3 ESPN FM. That's Matt Blatt Kia. They want to get you approved today. Matt Blatt Kia, Black Horse Pike, Egg Harbor Township. Visit them online at mattblattkia.com. The NBA playoffs start today. The play-in games are done. No more ambiguity. No more what-ifs. We know the matchups. We know the games. We know what's going down. And because of that, we're going to break down the entire playoff weekend coming up at 12:20 with Jonathan Van Tobel, host of the Hardwood Handicappers podcast. ESPN Las Vegas radio host will join us coming up a little bit later this hour. Plus, of course, you guys can text in throughout the show as well, 609-403-0973. If you're listening on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. If you're watching the show on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, if you're following 97.3 ESPN, you can comment on the stream as well below. And listen, we got a lot of basketball to get to, and we're going to get it all in. But before I get to the basketball, I got to touch on the Eagles for a minute because we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and we did get a lot of time to talk about it, but I wanted to follow up on this. We saw something yesterday that is a huge, huge deal for this team. Yesterday, the Philadelphia Eagles went out of their way on social media, on social media to put out there the return of one Brandon Graham to Eagles practice. This is a huge, huge deal because remember, without him last year, it was one of the pieces that was missing from an offensive line that you could argue that offensive line was at least 80% healthy. They probably would have won a couple more games at least. But because they weren't healthy and because Carson Wentz played horribly, he went 4-11-1. So to get into it, Brandon Graham's return is a major step forward for this organization. Because now Brandon Brooks is going to be on the field for this team heading in the training camp. He's not going to miss a bunch of time. He's already practicing right now in OTAs. Now, there's no contact right now. There's no, guys banging each other. It's probably a good thing. It's part of his rehab. But just to see him on the field in his jersey doing drills, it gives you a little extra positive. It gives you a little extra pep in your step, at least for me, when it comes to the Eagles. Because when I look at this team, the biggest difference for me for this year from last year is if that line can be healthy with Brooks and Lane Johnson on the right side, Kelsey at center, Sayamalu at left guard, hopefully Mailata at left tackle, because no offense to Andre Dillard. I think Andre Dillard can be a very good NFL left tackle, but I think this Mailata kid is a beast. And I'd rather have a beast at my left tackle than just a very nice player. I think that Mailata's potential is much higher than Dillard, honestly. What I saw from Mailata last year, the fact that he never played football, and in a couple years, he was able to elevate himself from being a guy who never played football to being a reserve to then being a starting left tackle. That part was out of necessity, obviously, but he did an excellent job. For a guy who never played football, you could argue he was one of the 15 best left tackles of football last year. And he's a big, athletic dude. Give me a big, athletic freak at the left tackle over a guy who's just an athlete. Andre Dillard's a very good athlete, but if you ask me, give me Mailata. And if you had that line out there, all five of those guys from left to right, Mailata, Sayamalu, Kelsey, Brooks, Lane Johnson, for at least 14 to 17 games this year, you have a good chance to win at least 8-9 games. Because football is won in the trenches. It's not sexy. You can't put it in fantasy football. You can't bet on it on your fantasy sportsbook app, the FanDuel sportsbook app, or you can't play fantasy football with it. But what it does is it wins you football games. You win games because of the guys up front. There has never been a team that won a Super Bowl with a garbage offensive line. There has never been a team that has made a deep playoff run and had any success for any period of time in the National Football League without a very good offensive line at some level. They might not all have been Pro Bowlers, but daggone it, they could get the job done. When the Eagles went to the Super Bowl, they had Lane Johnson, Brandon Brooks, Jason Kelsey, all Pro Bowlers. Isaac Sayamalu wasn't there at the time. It was Stefan Wisniewski, and he did a very good job, all things considered. And Halapuli Vaitai flipped that starting at left tackle in the Super Bowl into a massive overpaid contract that the Lions gave him. Now the Lions have to overpay him because he happens to run a Super Bowl team. But still, you got that success. And it was a big part of it was the offensive line. So to me, Brandon Brooks being back out there is a huge, huge deal. Now, speaking of the guys being out there, how about this factoid? The guys are out there. And as I talked about this week on 97.3 ESPN, Nick Sirianni deserves credit. This guy is a first-year head coach. He walked into this organization. First time being a head coach, young guy, little green when it comes to deal with the media. But what did he do? He saw that his players back in April came out and said, we're not attending mandatory camps. So we're not attending voluntary camps because of XYZ. And as I've talked about here on 97.3 ESPN, the NFLPA has mishandled this whole thing, in my opinion. Perception is reality. If you would have handled it better, I think it would have been handled differently. Well, Nick Sirianni didn't wait around for the NFL and the NFLPA to figure it out. He reached out to the veteran leaders on this team himself and said, how can we compromise to get you guys in the building? You know what they did? They got rid of the 3-day mandatory minicamp. And they said, we're going to have 3 weeks of off-season training activities. Now, there's no 11-on-11s. There's no contact drills. But everyone's in the building doing work. Everyone's in the building learning tape. Everyone's in the building getting to know their coaches, getting to know each other. Nick Sirianni's greatest move so far has been to reach out to his players and say, hey, guys, how can I get you guys in the building? And they came to a compromise. Now they're in the building for 3 weeks instead of maybe just 3 days. So Nick Sirianni may not be the greatest public speaker, but he's establishing relationships with the players. And establishing relationship with the players is a big part of being a football coach. You got to have a relationship with these guys. You got to connect with them. You got to understand who your players are. And you know what? When I see a guy like Sirianni keep talking about, we want fundamentals, we want technique. Jonathan Gannon's up there saying, I care about guys who are mean, who are smart, who have a high motor. When you hear all these different things and you find out that these are football lifers, these are not guys who are out there to win the press conference. They're out there to win football games. I'm not promising you they're going to win every game, but what I am promising you is that it's at least going to be better than what we saw last year. Because you know what we saw last year? A lack of discipline, a lack of fundamentals, sloppy play, a lot of injuries, a lot of second guessing, a lot of ego. Change can be a good thing sometimes. And you know what? For as much as I was against getting rid of Doug Peterson, I'm excited for what I've seen from Sirianni so far. And again, I'm not promising you they're going to win the division, but I think they'll be a lot more competitive than people may realize. Josh Hennig here on Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN. We're to get into the Sixers versus Wizards and break down the entire NBA playoff slate coming up in 10 minutes with Jonathan Von Tobel from Hardwood Handicappers Podcast and ESPN Los Angeles radio host. Text board is open, 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. We also live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, where James chimes in and says, I agree on left tackle. Maya Alada is the real deal. I'm with you, James. Listen, I don't think that people, and I'm not saying we got to give Howie Roseman credit, okay? The guy was a 7th-round pick. You want to give anybody credit? Give Jeff Stoutland developing this guy credit, all right? That's where I'm going to go. If you want to give Howie credit for the draft pick, whatever. We can dice that two ways from Sunday. But the way the Eagles developed this young man from a guy who never played football into a starting left tackle in the NFL is very exciting to me. Think about the Philadelphia Eagles. They went from Trey Thomas to Jason Peters, 2 all-pro level left tackles. And Jason Peters might even go into the Hall of Fame one day. And now you got Maya Alada out there, and he might also be another Pro Bowl at minimum level caliber guy. I mean, seriously, if there's 32 left tackles in the NFL, every team's got a starting left tackle, right? Maya Alada is no worse than what? Middle of the pack? You can win with that guy. And I think he might be better than that. I think his potential we haven't seen it yet because he's barely played football. He's kind of like a little bit Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid didn't start playing basketball until his mid-teens. At this point in his life, he's only played basketball for 13 years, 14 years of his life. And he's an MVP candidate. Finalist for the league MVP is Joel Embiid. Look at Maya Alada. He's only played NFL football now for a few years. He played rugby before. Rugby. Never played an NFL snap. Never played an American football snap in his life. Came from Australia. And now he's probably going to be your starting left tackle. I think he's the real deal, like James said. I'm excited to see him out there because I think that with a year under his belt, he can only get better. The sky is the limit for this guy. And if you think about it, you need a good left tackle because the Cowboys, they got some pass rushers. The Washington football team, they got a ton of pass rushers, even without Kerrigan out there. And the Giants, they upgraded their defense this offseason. You need somebody to block those guys. By the way, speaking of Ryan Kerrigan, how about that signing? I mentioned this earlier in the week. I almost fell over when I saw the Eagles were signing Ryan Kerrigan. I was shocked. And apparently, the defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon, was a part of the reason why they signed him because he wanted him on this team. The reports are that Gannon told the Eagles this guy is someone we need. And now you got another veteran in that locker room with these young players, the Josh Sweats, the Derek Barnetts. You drafted Milton Williams. You drafted Marin Jackson. Now you got another veteran in that locker room to tell these guys how to play football, to mentor them, to be an example. And it just helps he can play good as well. The Eagles were 3rd in the NFL last year in sacks. And they were top 5 in the NFL in quarterback pressures. And that was with running that Jim Schwartz scheme where he never blitzed. And now You have a defense going to blitz a lot more than Jim Schwartz did last year, what they're calling a hybrid defense, where you might not even know what the front is half the time. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you see even better pass rush numbers than last year. I know the defense gets a lot of flack because the secondary was poor last year. They still got to fix that, but getting Kerrigan's a big deal. So it's a good week for the Eagles. You sign Ryan Kerrigan. Brandon Brooks is back on the field. Nick Sirianni worked with the players to get them in the building for 3 weeks so they can start learning the system, learning the players, learning the coaching staff. I love it. All thumbs up, all positives on the Eagles front right now. With the more of your texts throughout the show, of course, the text board is 609-403-0973, 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation right here on 973 ESPN FM. We're going to take a little break from the football talk because coming up next, the NBA playoffs start today. You can hear Clippers versus Mavericks later this afternoon at 4:30 here on 973 ESPN. Sixers versus Wizards tomorrow at 1 p.m., followed by Lakers and Suns, all game ones today and tomorrow here on your home for Sixers basketball in the NBA playoffs on 973 ESPN FM. Jonathan Von Tobel joins us next to break it all down. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Sports Bash Saturday on 973 ESPN FM. The 973 ESPN mobile app. It's free thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. And we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter where you can watch the show. Just follow 973 ESPN.
It's Sixers playoff basketball tomorrow on 97.3 ESPN with the voice of the 76ers, Tom McInnes, calling all the exciting Sixers playoff action.
And he jammed it! A block at one end, a Euro step, and a slam at the other.
It's Sixers Wizards Game 1 tomorrow. Coverage begins at 1 p.m. Philadelphia 76ers playoff basketball on your radio home of the Sixers in South Jersey. 97.3 ESPN FM.
On some models excludes score bet with GM financing. Excludes prior sale. See dealer for details.
Many car dealers all around the area are having trouble getting inventory, so they're jacking up prices big time. But at Bennett Chevy, we haven't changed a thing. Why would we? You said you love our GM supplier employee pricing. You pay what our supplier employees pay, not a penny more. Bennett also gives you all the rebates, which can add up to a whopping 25% off MSRP. Plus, Bennett's got available 0% financing that'll save you thousands more. Looking for used? Good news. Bennett's still paying a minimum $7,000 for any trade you bring us, regardless of condition or miles. Any old Heath is worth a minimum $7,000 towards any pre-owned in stock. And our non-commissioned sales staff is paid on your satisfaction, not how much you spend, so there's no pressure ever. And Bennett Chevy is now an authorized lease return center for all brands. So now more than ever, there's just no beating Bennett. Find new roads at Bennett Chevrolet, Egg Harbor Township, and BennettChevy.com.
PGA Championship Week, and PropSwap is bursting with bets on all your favorite golfers. Prop swappers across the country just cashed in huge on the Masters, and now is another opportunity to get in on the action, as golf is the perfect sport to profit with PropSwap. Buy a golfer today and then sell it for a profit over the weekend, and you can rest easy all through Sunday knowing you're already a winner. So buy a bet today and flip it tomorrow and start making money all from the comfort of your living room chair. Only on PropSwap, America's #1 site to buy and sell sports bets.
This is Sports Bash Saturday with Josh Hennig, live from the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. Here's Josh Hennig.
Sports Bash Saturday here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, we are only here for a power hour, 1 o'clock today. We have the Yankees and White Sox right here on 97.3 ESPN. But following that, we have Clippers, Mavs, Game 1, Sixers, Wizards tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and the NBA playoffs are right here to get into all of that and more. Joining us right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN, Jonathan Von Tobel. He is the host of the Hardwood Handicappers podcast, ESPN Las Vegas radio host here on 97.3 ESPN. Joining us, Jonathan, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. Covering the NBA for VSiN. It's the 72-game regular season, 82-game regular season. They're fun. I enjoy it, I think, more often than not. But by the time you get here, you're ready for it to all get going. So I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, I felt like the play-in tournament was only like a tiny appetizer. It's like, you go to that restaurant, you think, oh, this appetizer looks great. And then it comes out to you, it's like this small. And you're like, what did I spend all that money for? It felt like that was what the play-in tournament was a bit.
Yeah. No, and look, we got some good ones, right? So you got a good couple of nuggets out of it. You got that Lakers and Warriors game, which lived up, I think, to the hype. The Spurs-Grizzlies game before that was great. And I thought last night was a lot of fun, too, between the Grizzlies and the Warriors. So you got some pretty good, solid action out of it. But now we're ready for the real thing. And it's going to be great over the next few months to see this play out.
Absolutely. So let's run down the schedule in terms of chronology, and we'll get to the Sixers-Wizards game, which our audience is very interested. But I got to start with this. The first game today, Miami and Milwaukee. This game fascinates me because Miami, we know they got to the finals last year, but that was in the bubble. Milwaukee, they've been to the playoffs multiple times, haven't broken through to the NBA finals. You got a 2-time league MVP, a former coach of the year. Can Milwaukee exercise the demons and beat Miami?
So I think they can, right? I think one of the fatal flaws that the analysis around this series is, hey, these two teams met last year and we know what happened, so the same is likely to happen again, right? But, the line I keep using is these are the same franchises. These are not the same teams. The Miami Heat of this year are not the second best three-point shooting team like they were last year. The Miami Heat this year do not get to play Milwaukee, as you mentioned, on a neutral court every single one of these contests. Now, they have to go to Milwaukee to take on the Bucks for a couple of these games. Home court does make a difference. Travel does make a slight difference. And the biggest change in terms of all of those things we talk about, neutral court to home court, not the same shooting team, you're not getting the same bang for the buck that you were on the series price. Remember, last year you were getting nearly 4-1 on the Miami Heat to win this series against the Milwaukee Bucks. This year, it's under $3. And so, that's the kind of differences you got to look at in terms of a betting perspective, why you would be looking at one side or the other. And I think Milwaukee is going to move on here because out of all the issues that the Bucks have, 29th in terms of perimeter defense, right? Opponents, the second worst shooting rate from beyond the arc against them. I don't trust Miami offensively. They've been consistently bad all year long, 19th at three-point shooting. I just don't know if they can exploit the issues that Milwaukee has. So I think I think the honor rests in Brooklyn's favor to do that. So I think the Bucks move on in about 6 or 7 games here.
Well, I mean, for Brooklyn, that might be an issue as well, because we saw that the Bucks can give them problems. They have the athletes to maybe give them a little trouble. And we know the Nets basically play zero defense. The Bucks play enough defense. So even if the Bucks get out of the first round and beat the Heat, it's not like the Nets series is going to be easy for either of those teams. That could be a 7-game series there.
Yeah, that'll be a tight series. I would say, though, you look, and you're talking to a very big James Harden stan right now. Before he went down for the hamstring injury, had a ticket on him to win MVP. It was very much, pimping his resume out there. I think Harden makes all the difference in the world, right? We saw those 2 games that these two teams played. I think it was 2 weeks ago or so when Milwaukee took 2 from Brooklyn. James Harden changes everything in that dynamic, right? He's somebody who can give them a consistent presence within 4 feet of the basket in that floater range. He's not as much of a jump shooter as Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant are. He's a ball dominant type of guy. He changes the entire aspect of it. And I would say one thing about Brooklyn, it's very true, right? Statistically, they're a poor defense, 21st in terms of defensive efficiency on the season. But very quietly, when these three are on the floor together, according to Cleaning the Glass, their defensive rating is actually better than Boston's than it was this year. It's 111. Like it's not abhorrent, right? It's not like, hey, you're just going to get whatever you want against this type of team. And that's going to help them, I think, in the long run. But overall, their floor, not even their ceiling, their floor, Brooklyn, is so high offensively that any one of these teams, especially a Milwaukee team that just can't stop teams from beyond the arc, they're going to have a tough time. So I would think that, it's going to be a tight series. Off the top of my head, given everything that they're going to be healthy, I think it'll be about a 6-game series in favor of the Brooklyn Nets, but I'm very high on Brooklyn with Harden on the floor.
See, and that's where I understand what you're saying. See, I'm with you on the Harden thing. You could argue Harden is the most important player for the Nets because when he's on the floor, at least he can elevate people around him in ways that just Kyrie can't, right? But my problem with the Nets is, and this is why I don't want to say I'm a Nets hater, but I'm a Nets doubter, and that is you got Durant, Harden, soft tissue injuries, hamstrings. What if that creeps up? What if Kyrie has another personal issue in his life? He decides to just bail in the middle of a series. My concern with the Nets is I don't know if all three of those guys are going to be there every night. And I feel like if Harden misses any time in these playoffs, this team is just doomed.
Yeah, I mean, no, those are all fair, right? We came into this, the postseason is 8-9 games that they have played together, all of them, the soft tissue injuries. Now, it does seem like with the Kyrie thing, it seems like, yes, well, he's had his comments and his time off, that it seems like the playoffs are something of his focal point at this point right now. Of course, Kyrie is an enigma. We have no idea how he's going to handle it, but I just operate under the assumption until they're not there, that they're going to be there, right? And so when you look at them all together, that's going to be really strong. But I've made this comparison before, and I wouldn't slight anybody who thinks it. They are in danger of potentially being the Clippers of last year. Remember, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard didn't really play together. They go to the bubble. Lou Williams gets suspended. Montrezl Harrell is not there because of a death in his family. Patrick Beverley gets injured, so Reggie Jackson has to play a lot of those minutes. Like, they weren't really ready for that bubble situation. What happened? Tough series against the Dallas Mavericks. They lose that 3-1 series lead to Denver, and there is a chance that the Nets could potentially be that team with the lack of continuity. So I would not slight anybody who sits there and tells me, no, like, I can't believe in it because of X, Y, and Z and what we've seen. It's completely understandable.
Jonathan Von Tobel joining us here on the Boardwalk kind of hotline here on 97.3 ESPN at me, JVT on Twitter. He is the host of the Hardwood Handicappers podcast. Also, he's a host on ESPN Las Vegas Radio. Jonathan, let's go to the other two series that start today here on 97.3 ESPN FM. Mavs, Clippers coming up 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. Can the Clippers live up to expectations this year compared to their struggles last year?
So I think they can. I think very quietly, and I would say, I guess take this with a grain of salt. They were my team to come out of the Western Conference a year ago, and I, of course, fell short a little bit with that 3-1 series lead blown. But I think when you look at this team in the second half, Josh, like when you see what they have done, they have really regressed positively defensively. Remember in the first half, they were about 19th, 21st in defensive efficiency. But one of my favorite little nuggets that you can dig up when you look at some of those, the NBA has great tracking data. In the first half, they're actually one of the league leaders in terms of tightly contested shots on defense, but they were one of the bottom teams in terms of field goal percentage on those looks. So essentially, they're getting to their spots, but opponents are still knocking those down. That has regressed to the mean fantastically for this team. In the second half, since the All-Star break, top 5 offense, top 5 defense. They are the best three-point shooting team in the league, right? First across the board, whether it's overall three-point shooting, non-corner three-point shooting, corner three-point shooting. Rajon Rondo has changed them a little bit offensively. Their frequency of attempts at the rim have gone up quite a bit. They were 26th in the first half. They're 15th in the second half. Like, what I like so much about them is they have addressed the issues that they have had from a personnel standpoint, and they've improved statistically in the areas of the floor in which they were really struggling in the first half. And they're finally healthy, right? Serge Ibaka missed a good chunk of games. He comes back near the end of the regular season. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George surpassed the amount of possessions they played together well in the middle of the season they were last year, so they've already got better continuity. And when they're on the floor together, they've been absolutely spectacular. So I think they can finally kind of deliver on everything we expected, and we at least get that Western Conference Finals matchup we were hoping for between them and the Los Angeles Lakers. And in a series like this, Doncic is a really good player. But the one thing that sticks out to you when you evaluate the Dallas Mavericks, when he's on the floor, a historic offensive rating of 118.3, but they're barely outscoring their opponents by 3 points every 100 possessions because their defense has been so bad. And, like, that's the problem with Dallas. I thought the last game of the regular season was a microcosm of the Mavericks, right? Where you just give up everything defensively to the Minnesota Timberwolves and end up losing that game. It's not going to fly against a team like the Los Angeles Clippers. So I think this has the potential to be a relatively quick series, like Clippers in 5.
Yeah, the thing with the Mavericks is that, I mean, first of all, you're right. They probably, in every metric, they have a worse defense than the Nets have this year. And when I think about the Mavericks as well, it's like Rick Carlisle defenses are better than this, right? Rick Carlisle has a history of being a pretty good defensive coach. And it seems like this roster was built around Luka maybe the wrong way. They were leaning too far in one direction. And I think that's what can bite them here.
Yeah, and look, and I have my common theme when evaluating teams is if your perimeter defense is poor, then I'm just not really going to value a lot in the big picture. It's why I'm kind of down on Milwaukee in the big picture, and it's why I'm down on Dallas. Season long wise, I think they're like 17th in opponent 3-point shooting. But if you look in the second half, specifically above the break 3-point shooting, would tend to be non-assisted threes. They're like 24th. Like they just haven't really been good from beyond the arc. And those are the kind of issues that when you're talking about best of 7 series, especially against teams that have elite wing players, right? Like Paul George, like Kawhi Leonard, like those teams are going to get you. And even in that, that bubble series last year, one of the games they stole was because Reggie Jackson actually kind of switched on to Luka Doncic and he buries a step back three that was like 30 feet long and they eventually win that game. I think this is one where the Clippers are going to be able to be very vocal about the way they've handled things. They clearly have a better vibe in the locker room. Remember Montrezl Harrell and all of them. I just think this sets up this year a lot better for them than it would be a year ago.
Let's go to this series, the last one of the night, 10:30 tonight. This is the series I'm most excited for in the Western Conference. Portland versus Denver, Dame time versus Jokic. I mean, there's so many storylines to go with here. I'm personally just going to hit the over on this series every single game, whether it wins or not. I'm just going to hit the over no matter what. I feel like this is just going to be so entertaining, and it's going to be a real test of, whose flaws are going to be less of a problem, right? It's going to be Portland's lack of interior defense and, well, really anything at this point outside of Nurkic versus a team in the Nuggets, which I think are going to miss Jamal Murray maybe a little more than people realize.
Right. You're absolutely right. And I think this is very fascinating for multiple reasons. You have hit on one of my issues with Portland, though, and it's a common thing with me. It's funny. We talk about like the general conversation around the league is, defense doesn't matter anymore. Well, it does, right? The Portland Trailblazers are the 29th ranked defense in the NBA. They're the worst defensive team among all of them in the postseason at this point right now in terms of just overall defensive efficiency. That's not going to get you very far, and especially when your defense and where it lacks is on the inside, right? The most optimal shot in the NBA is not the three-point shot. It's within 4 feet of the basket. And so when you have an edge that the Nuggets do in the front court, right? Because both of these teams have inherent edges. The Portland Trailblazers have a much better backcourt with CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard. But the Denver Nuggets have a much better front court with Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, and Nikola Jokic. So how that weighs in terms of the big picture is going to be fascinating. And by the way, it's not just Jamal Murray, right? We know that. Well, Barton is injured as well. Monte Morris has been banged up, but he's back on the floor. But we know we're going to get Barton back at some point. I know I have the inherent advantage there with the Denver Nuggets. I think the market kind of overreacted here a little bit in making Portland the favorite in this series when they don't have home court, when they have that flaw on the inside. So there's some spots. Cirque out here in Las Vegas had them at like plus 112, the Nuggets, to win this series. I put a little on that. I just think that this Nuggets team has such a big advantage down low. They'll get Barton back at some point that they're going to be able to make it through a series like this. I thought they were going to win in about 7 games.
Jonathan Von Tobel joining us here on the Boardwalk on a hotline here on Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN at me, JVT on Twitter. He is the host of the Hardwood Handicappers podcast. John, so let's go to tomorrow's games. Obviously, in this area, the huge deal here in South Jersey. Sixers, #1 seed for the first time in 20 years. And that's where I'm going to start with you. Are people undervaluing home court advantage for the Sixers?
They could be, right? And maybe you can familiarize me with this. Do you know what they're doing with fans in terms of allowing them into the arena?
Yeah, it's going to be a little over 10,000.
Yeah, see, those are going to be big. The Knicks are allowing, I think, 15K into their building as well, for this first round. So that's going to be fascinating. We saw the home teams hold serve for the most part, right, in the play-in game, save for Memphis, who overcame the Golden State Warriors yesterday. But home court, I think, is going to be a little bit more important as we have now looked at this, season full of neutral courts and empty arenas. Now we're going to see the home teams, I think, have a little bit of an edge. And we know that historically in the last few years, Philly has been a really good home team. So I do think that when you look at Philly, I guess if they're being undervalued, I just don't really. I will say this. They were 3 weeks ago. Some shops had Philly as the third choice in the Eastern Conference, in terms of the odds to win the East. That was ridiculous. They should have been the second choice. They are the second team in my power ratings behind Brooklyn. There's not that much difference between them because Philly plays immaculate defense, right? They have multiple wing defenders, whether it's Ben Simmons, whether it's going to be Danny Green, whether it's going to be T. Slybel, third best team in terms of force and turnovers in the NBA defensively. Like, there's so much that this team has working with it. And even in a series like against Brooklyn, right? That would be a really tough series for Brooklyn, mainly because they have the wing defenders to throw out there. And on top of that, they have an interior presence in Joel Embiid, who Brooklyn really has no matchup for, right? Like, in size, DeAndre Jordan can match up with him, but in terms of skill set and what he's going to have to do defensively, it's a really big mismatch. So I think if people are saying that Philly has no shot to get out of the Eastern Conference, if you don't believe that they have any chance against Brooklyn, I would say you're incorrect. I believe that Brooklyn wins that series, but that's like a 7-game series written all over it, 6-game series where Joel Embiid and the Philadelphia 76ers are going to be an extremely tough out against a team like the Brooklyn Nets.
Also in this area, a lot of people talk about the head coaching situation. You know, Brett Brown was here last year. Doc Rivers is here now. How much value do you or don't you put onto who the head coach is for a team in the playoffs? Like, for example, Doc, championship experience. Steve Nash, no coaching experience in the postseason. Budenholzer, been to the playoffs, haven't been to the final. So how do you gauge how the coaches, their value in all this?
Oh, I think they're extremely valuable, right? You know, you mentioned a couple. Let's talk about Miami and Milwaukee, for example. I think there's a massive coaching edge in favor of Miami. I think Mike Budenholzer has shown that he has an inability to adjust his game plans, specifically defensively. And when things start to go haywire, there's just no change from Milwaukee in terms of what they do. We saw that with Atlanta when he was in control of that team, right? Those seasons ago when they had top seeds of the Eastern Conference and did nothing with them. So I think coaching matters greatly. And in a matchup, it's funny, like with Philadelphia, I think there is some real criticisms of Doc Rivers in terms of the way he's handled things, right? We saw them blow the 3-1 series lead, all the stats leading up to that. I think he made some questionable choices in terms of his lineups that he was using in those series as well, like continuously throwing out Montrezl Harrell against Nikola Jokic, who was just absolutely destroying him on a possession basis. So I think there is inherent edges, and they're very important in a lot of these series. But having said that, you mentioned the big thing, like if we're talking Philly and Brooklyn, the edge would still go to Doc, even though you think he's flawed, because we just don't know what Steve Nash is yet, especially in a lot of these situations. I think there's been positives for Nash. I think one of the things that Nash does, which you would think is very common, but it's not in the NBA, like smart game management type things, like fouling up 3 late in games, things like that. He has shown the ability to do so, but we don't know anything about him. So I would say, one, yes, coaching is a massive edge if you can find it with a lot of these teams, and the other is between those two, you got to give Doc the edge a little bit there because he's been there and done that, and we don't know that much about Nash yet.
Of course, the Sixers versus Wizards tomorrow at 1 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN. Following that game, we got here on 97.3 ESPN, Lakers, Suns. And Jonathan, when I look at that series, I know a lot of people are taking the Lakers, but I don't think people can just dismiss the Suns out of hand. I mean, Chris Paul has had a great year. You know, if Devin Booker gets on fire, I mean, I don't know who the heck is stopping him with the Lakers. This feels like this is going to be a much tighter, closer series than people realize.
So I think I'm fascinated by this, and this is one of my pieces that I wrote this week about, you know, the postseason, things to look for. And the Suns were kind of the focal point of one of them because at the beginning of the year, one of the teams that frustrated me the most was Phoenix because I didn't think they were going to be this good. I didn't think they were going to be bad. I thought they were going to be a playoff team. I just didn't see second seed and top 5 defense in the NBA. And that's exactly what they were in the first half. But very quietly in the second half, they have regressed immensely defensively. You know, they finished the second half 21st in overall defensive efficiency. Their rim defense, one of the worst in the NBA, giving up nearly 67% to opponents on the season. They are the worst transition defense in the NBA, 30th by a mile in terms of guarding teams in the fast break. And the thing that the Lakers like to do, right, when they're at full strength, when AD and LBJ are out there, they are a team that attacks the rim, that uses their size to attack the glass. They're a get out and transition and run type of team. Like just all these things that the Lakers like to do and do well, and what they've done under Frank Vogel are things the Suns have really struggled with here this season and in the second half. And that's what really bothers me here with the Phoenix Suns. You know, they're a really solid team. Chris Paul has done a fantastic job, as is Devin Booker. You mentioned them. They're both elite mid-range scorers. Outside of them, though, their depth, I think, is a little shaky from an offensive standpoint, and the Lakers don't really have a lot to deal with either. But, like, if you look at just the inherent advantages that the Lakers have, I think this is actually a tough series for the Phoenix Suns to make it out of. I thought the Lakers were going to win in 6, and this has been one of the more fascinating series prices. We saw this open as high as minus 250 in favor of Los Angeles. It got down to minus 145, 130 in some spots. And now we're back up to like minus 180, 185. So I think the value there was betting Lakers minus 140, 145, 150. Now it's kind of reached to the point where it should probably be right where it's at. But I can't wait to watch it. I do think the Lakers win, but it's a fascinating series. One of the more fascinating ones we're going to see.
Another interesting series also is tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Knicks, Hawks. Obviously, the Hawks turned around their series midway through with the firing of Lloyd Pierce, bringing in Nate McMillan. And to me, I think the guy who should be coach of the year is Tom Thibodeau. I mean, how on earth is this team the 4th seed? I have no stinking idea, but they got them playing hard. Julius Randle's playing well. How do you lay out this series?
Yeah, 14-20 under Lloyd Pierce, right, for Atlanta, and then 27-11 under McMillan. Like, they've been great. And I bet Atlanta. I laid a little bit at minus 120. It's moved in that direction. I think we're like 135 now in most markets. But there's a couple of things, right? And the Knicks were undefeated against Atlanta. It should be immediately pointed out there. But Lloyd Pierce was the head coach for 2 of those games. Bogdan Bogdanovic missed a game. Danilo Gallinari missed 2. And then very famously, the final game between these two in the regular season, Trae Young and the Hawks are up 8. He goes down with a serious ankle injury, doesn't return, and they end up losing that game in overtime. So I think there's some nuance to why those games went down the way that they did. But I think overall, the Hawks have so many versatile lineups to put out there offensively. Traditionally big to attack the glass with Clint Capella. They can go small ball with 5 shooters at any one point, right, with a John Collins type. Like, there's so much they can do offensively. There's so much versatile offensive talent on this team that I think it's going to be a problem for New York. And I think the other part of this is, and this is one of my little favorite stats too, is the Knicks have, for lack of a better term, been getting kind of lucky if you look at some of the tracking data. They have given up the 3rd most wide open attempts from beyond the arc of any team in the NBA, and yet they are second in opponents shooting on wide open attempts. So you're giving up these wide open looks, and yet they're not going down, shooting at about 33, 34%. In a best-of-7 series, if you're going to continuously give up the same open looks to the same team, that's game plan, man. That's mismatch hunting, and they're going to start to find those, and they're going to start to hit those. It's been one of the better three-point shooting teams since Mill has taken over. So I like the Hawks. I rate them as the 4th best team in the Eastern Conference. I think they're going to win that series, so I did bet them to win it. New York's been awesome. I have a ticket on Randle to win Most Improved. I hope he really does. It looks like he's going to, but I think the Knicks story ends here in the 1st round.
Very, very interesting. Finally, I'm not going to ask you if the Memphis Grizzlies are going to beat the Jazz, because I don't think anybody in their right mind thinks that, despite the fact that last night was an amazing, fun game to watch. I mean, if you don't love watching, I put it on Twitter last night, if you don't love watching Ja Morant play basketball, you don't love basketball. So let's be realistic. But my question is, are the Jazz real? Can the Jazz be a legitimate number 1 seed with their 13,000 fans in attendance, or are the Jazz maybe a one-and-done situation? Are they a 1 series win and then they're going to wilt in the next round, or can they make a legitimate deep run?
So I think they are real, and I think that the Lakers, for the most part, like, that'll be pretty tough, right? Like, that has 7-game series written all over it, because what the Jazz do from beyond the arc is absolutely incredible, right? Over 40% of their attempts from 3. They have over, I think it's like 39.8% on the season in terms of their 3-point shooting. They've been absolutely incredible. And so from an offensive standpoint, they're going to be a problem, I think, for the Los Angeles Lakers. The thing that ultimately, I think, holds Utah back, if they are the one and done that you're talking about, is from a defensive standpoint, well, across the board, they are absolutely great. If you look at them from a personnel standpoint, they have no true wing defender, right? Royce O'Neal is a really solid defender, but he gives up so much size and girth to a guy like LeBron James or a Kawhi Leonard if they move on and take on the Clippers in a Western Conference Finals. Bojan Bogdanovic is a good defender too, but he gives up a lot of speed to solid wing players like those two. And so ultimately, when you're talking about those 2 series, which they're going to have to get through, right? They're probably going to have to get through the Clippers in the 2nd round. They're going to have to get through a Los Angeles Lakers as well. Like, that is something that is going to be pretty tough for the Utah Jazz to get through twice. And that's the tough part about their path, is to make it to where they're at. They got to get through, more than likely, the 2 gargantuans in Los Angeles, and you never really want that as a team if you're competing for a title. It's why I think what the Clippers did were relatively smart, because you put off the Lakers until the final round if that's going to happen. So I think they're legitimate, but the path is extremely tough. But it also I don't think that takes away from their legitimacy. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to lose to the 2 best teams in the Western Conference, there's no slight on what you have done as a team. I ultimately don't think they make it out of the Western Conference, but I do think that they are the 3rd best team in the Western Conference, arguably the 2nd best team given the health of LeBron James and Anthony Davis.
He is Jonathan Von Tobel. He is the host of the Hardwood Handicappers podcast, also hosts on ESPN Las Vegas Radio. Follow him on Twitter at MEJVT. That's me, JVT, on Twitter. And as all guests, he appeared with this awesome breakdown today on the Boardwalk kind of hotline. Jonathan, great stuff today. Appreciate you jumping on.
Of course, anytime. Thank you.
Josh Hennig here on Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get back to your text next at 609-403-0973, plus your comments as you watch on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. NBA playoffs, Sixers, Wizards, Eagles, positive week. What do we think? I'll hear from you guys before we get out of here. Yankees, White Sox, top of the hour, followed by Clippers, Mavs right here on 97.3 ESPN. But first, we wrap up the show next here on 97.3 ESPN FM. The 97.3 ESPN mobile app is free thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. And we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You want to watch the Sports Bash with Mike Gill, Game Night with Josh Hennig? Just follow 973 ESPN on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter.
The NBA playoffs on ESPN Radio.
Bang! Luka Doncic just won it for the Mavericks.
Luka Doncic and the 5th-seeded Dallas Mavs face Kawhi and the 4th-seeded Clippers.
I'll say this about the Clippers. I don't think they're being talked about enough. The logic just points you to this kind of should be the year of the Clippers.
It's Game 1 in LA. Later today, the NBA playoffs exclusively on 97.3 ESPN FM.
Trust Jenkins Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning. Homeowners, no need to call the drain guy, the heater guy, or the plumbing guy. Call Jenkins. One call does it all. Jenkins technicians are trained to do it all, so you only have to call one number, 609-641-6262. Jenkins & Sons has been on the job since 1949. For new heating and air installation, service and maintenance, ductless air conditioning systems, water heaters, boilers, oil service, plumbing, and drain cleaning services, one call does it all. Call 609-641-6262 or visit jenkinsandsons.com. That's 609-641-6262 or jenkinsandsons.com.
Jenkins Plumbing and Heating. We're always here for you. Jenkins Plumbing and Heating. We're always here for you. Jenkins Plumbing and Heating. We're always here for you.
Quick Draw from the New Jersey Lottery makes winning feel epic.
I will pick up to 10 numbers. Then the game will draw 20 numbers. Who's with me, Jersey?
I want to match more so I could win more.
My $1 bet could win up to $100,000. Let's go!
Go epic with Quick Draw. Played every 4 minutes at lottery retailers. Anything can happen in Jersey.
Must be 18 or older to buy a lottery ticket. Please play responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
This is Sports Bash Saturday with Josh Hennig, live from the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. Here's Josh Hennig.
Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get to your text next at 609-403-0973. Also, we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can watch the show. Sports Bash Saturday being brought to you by Clark's Moving and Storage in South Jersey. For your next local or long-distance move, Clark's Moving and Storage is your first call. They are dependable and always show up. Visit them online at clarksmovingandstorage.com. A couple different comments to get to here on the text board. We got our first, you get the order they came in. Dan in EHT commented a little earlier about the Eagles. We'll get to him first at 609-403-0973. Dan says, let's be real. Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks have chronic injury problems. Kelsey is a fingernail away from retiring. And Mailata doesn't understand the game. There are plays where Mailata got beat bad last year. Look, a couple things. One, to say that guys have chronic injury issues, I think is overstated because majority of football has injury issues. Unless your name is like, I don't know, Tom Brady, Bruce Matthews, like guys who have a history of just not missing games with injury, you could argue everyone has injury issues. Look at the Cowboys. Their two best offensive linemen, Tyron Smith and Zach Martin, have both had major injuries in the last few years. Eric Fisher just got signed by the Colts after coming off of a major injury. Now, if you want to tell me that you don't believe Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks will play a full 17-game slate, I can give you. That's why I said earlier, if you can get 14 out of 17 games with this unit, I believe in them. To say Kelsey's a fingernail away from retiring, I think is completely unfair. This is a guy who played through numerous injuries over the years. Remember, he had a huge brace on his arm last year. The guy is a warrior. Don't undersell Kelsey. That guy is a potential Hall of Famer one day. The guy's an all-pro center. He has worked his tail off to be what he is today. So to say he's a fingernail away from retiring, I think is completely illogical and unfair. And Mailata, I said earlier, he's still learning the game. I said that he is still young and learning the game, and he got beat bad a couple times last year. That was why Carson Wentz was seeing ghosts. Carson Wentz played poorly because he played poorly. Carson Wentz literally stared down Zach Ertz in the Bengals game for 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, threw the ball. The corners had to run in front of the ball and get the interception. He did that multiple times last year. The Eagles did not give up sacks because of Mailata. They gave up sacks because Carson Wentz held the ball more than any starting quarterback last year in the pocket. The Eagles held opponents with the least amount of quarterback hurries under 2 seconds or less. So when Carson Wentz was holding the ball, that's why plays collapsed, because he didn't play well. So I can't blame Mailata for that. I think you're being completely unfair by Kelsey. But if you want to tell me you don't have faith that Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks are going to play a full slate this year, I'll give you that. I'm not going to deny that. They have an injury history. I totally get that. All right, one more text to get in here before we get out of here. We're running out of real estate here, but I do like to hear from you guys, whether we agree or not. Like this texter. Now, no, I'm going to read the full text. I could only fit part of it on the screen because it was too long of a text. But the texter says, I'm so glad the playoffs are here. I want to see how bad the Sixers perform. And I'm not talking about the first round. I'll watch Harris Simmons on offensive end, and I've yet to be impressed as much as I tell people they just don't understand the playoffs is a different beast. Until I see people perform at a high level in the playoffs on the regular, I don't want to hear all the time about how good they are. Well, here's the problem, texter, with your belief. First of all, to assume the Sixers are going to perform bad, I think is a strong bias on your part, okay? Objective basketball people don't think the Sixers are as bad as you're paying them out to be. So obviously you're not objective. Second of all, you said yourself that until I see people perform at a high level in the playoffs on a regular, I don't want to hear about how good they are. So what you're telling me is we don't believe in the Bucks because Giannis and the Bucks have struggled and collapsed in the postseason. You don't believe in Budenholzer, their coach, because he is choked as a coach. You don't believe in Steve Nash and the Nets because Steve Nash has never coached in the playoffs. You don't believe in Harden then because Harden has choked in the playoffs. You don't believe in the Hawks because they've never been to the playoffs. You don't believe in the Knicks because they've never been to the playoffs. And what you're saying is the only team you believe in is the Heat. If I'm to take your comment literally, the only team in this postseason that has proven anything under your synopsis of I don't want to hear how good they are until they perform regular playoffs is the Miami Heat. So according to your synopsis, everyone else stinks. It's only the Heat. Thanks. Man, people just really hate the Sixers sometimes. I'm Josh Hennig. Have a great weekend.
South Jersey's sports station, 97.3 ESPN. Wake up weekday morning 6 to 10 with Keyshawn, Jay, Will, and Zubin. Followed by Greeny with Mike Greenberg from 10 till noon. At noon, it's Bart and Hahn. Then from 2 to 6 p.m., it's South Jersey's #1 rated sports talk show, The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. And from 6 to 7, Josh Hennig hosts Game Night. Plus, 97.3 ESPN is your exclusive play-by-play home for Philadelphia Eagles, Sixers, and Flyers, the NBA playoffs and finals, Major League Baseball, and the World Series, the NFL Draft, Monday, Thursday, and Sunday Night Football, the NFL playoffs, and Super Bowl 56. We are South Jersey's sports leader. 97.3 ESPN. And listen anywhere with the free mobile app.